Perhaps that was a sign. Good morning, everyone, again, and welcome to today's sector thematic session, Powering the Digital Economy, Turning Data Center Growth into Energy Transition Opportunities. My name is Melody Ovenden. I'm a senior energy specialist here at the Asian Development Bank, part of the ADB's Emerging Areas team in energy. Today, very happy to have you all here today. And what I'd like to do is first to introduce our scene setter. We have our Director General, Winifred Wicklein. He is Director General of ADB South East Asia Department. Mr. Wicklein leads the planning and delivery of ADB's goals, strategies, and work plan in Southeast Asia. DG?
Melody, thank you. Good morning, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you. Great pleasure to be here on a very exciting topic, which is it's for ADB. It's an emerging area powering the digital economy. It's super interesting, which will keep all of us very excited and engaged for the future, and we look forward to having this session with yourselves, getting all the insights from the various angles, I suppose, by talking to some of you. We have policymakers in the room, I think a utility or two. We have and regulator. We have from development partners, I saw a couple, and technology companies, some old colleagues, which are no young previous colleagues, but still young on the technology side. We have colleagues. Melody, thank you for and Peter for organizing and moderating. So we often talk about the digital transition and the energy transition as if there were two separate agendas, but increasingly they're not. They're becoming very much part of the same discussion these days. The success of the digital economy depends on reliable, affordable, and sustainable electricity. On the other hand, the future of power systems will increasingly be influenced by the demands of the digital economy. And nowhere is that intersection more visible than in the rapid growth of data centers. Across the region, the Asia and the Pacific region, governments increasingly see data centers as strategic economic infrastructure. So not only as enablers of digital services, but really as drivers of investment, drivers of innovation, of investment, and of economic growth. For years, many power systems focused on expanding access and on improving reliability. Today, in some markets, and increasingly so, the question is becoming whether and how power systems can expand actually fast enough to keep pace with rapidly growing digital demand. And here, data centers are emerging as a major source of electricity demand growth. According to the International Energy Agency, with us today here, electricity demand from data centers is set to more than double by 2030 to 945 terawatt hours, 945 terawatt hours from data centers, demand from data centers. That is slightly more than Japan's total electricity consumption today. So unsurprisingly, the growth of data centers is already influencing planning and investment decisions on generation, on transmission, and on grid modernization. And this creates a fundamental policy challenge. On the one hand, countries want to attract digital investments and capture the related economic benefits. But at the same time, countries must ensure that rising electricity demand does not undermine the energy security and the affordability and the sustainability goals and climate ambitions. The challenge then is not simply to provide more electricity, but to provide the kind of electricity and infrastructure that a digital economy requires, which is reliable, affordable, resilient, and increasingly low carbon. There's also a significant opportunity. Data centers can become a powerful catalyst for investment in the energy transition. The scale of demand they create can accelerate investment in renewable energy, energy storage, transmission networks, and smarter, more flexible grids. Importantly, digital technology is not only a source of demand, it is also part of the, or can also be part of the solution. AI, data-driven tools, and such can improve forecasting, integrate renewable energy, and help operate grids far more efficiently than ever before. I must point out, though, that it's important to keep in mind that developing digital infrastructure sustainably requires very, very close attention to resource efficiency, to environmental impacts, and in many locations to water availability and water use. Also, note that the digital economy is bigger than just data centers. Not every country will host large-scale facilities, but every country should have the opportunity to benefit from the digital economy through connectivity, cloud access, digital public infrastructure, and digital skills. The objective really should be an inclusive digital future where the benefits are widely shared rather than concentrated just in a handful of locations. And this angle is particularly important to us at ADB, given our broader development mission context. Just last week, our board of directors here in the ADB approved endorsed our first digital transformation strategy. That strategy reflects a very simple reality, that digital transformation is no longer simply a sector issue for us. It is a development issue. It shapes productivity, competitiveness, resilience, public service delivery, and economic opportunity. And increasingly, it is also an energy issue. The decisions countries take about their energy infrastructure today will influence their ability to participate in the digital economy tomorrow. And equally, the choices countries make about digital infrastructure today will increasingly shape the evolution of their energy systems going forward. Ultimately, the question is not whether the digital economy will continue to grow. It will. But if we get this right, data centers will not simply be consumers of electricity, but they can become drivers of investment in energy transition and in the cleaner, the smarter, and more resilient energy systems that our economies will need. And that is the opportunity we have before us, and I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG, for setting this scene. Let me now introduce Mark Dyson, Managing Director of Carbon Free Electricity, Rocky Mountain Institute, for the plenary keynote speech. Mark.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Wonderful to be here. My name is Mark Dyson. I'm the Managing Director for Electricity at Rocky Mountain Institute. I'll share a little bit about Rocky Mountain Institute on the next slide. But first, I wanted to reflect on some of the scene setting that the Director General just offered. And hopefully by the end of my presentation, you can see both the opportunity that in the US market, where I work for most of my time, has started to see around the opportunities to let data centers be a driver of grid transformation and energy transition, and also some of the challenges that we've seen and perhaps some of the mistakes that we've made that can be avoided in other geographies as they seek to accelerate their own data center energy growth, digital transformation, and energy transition. So my job today, I think, is to, again, share some of the challenges and the lessons learned from the experience of utilities and governments in the United States, and highlight where some of those opportunities might be most relevant to other geographies. I'm coming at this as the leader of the electricity program at a global nonprofit organization, Rocky Mountain Institute. We're headquartered in the United States, but we have offices around the world, including presence here in Southeast Asia and partnerships in Southeast Asia as well, where we've been working with partners on exactly this topic. So looking forward to bringing some of that insight into the conversation here today as well. I'll try to speak for about 20 minutes and share what the US market context looks like and how it's different from what we are seeing here in Asia. I'll talk about some of the challenges that we've experienced and also some of the emerging opportunities that are on display, and I'd like to highlight perhaps for inspiration for others to imitate perhaps. Before I go into the US context, though, I did want to share just an acknowledgement that the emerging markets, in particular in Asia and the United States, are coming at this from a very different starting point. So I've highlighted 4 elements of that here on the slide. The first is load growth, where in the US, demand has been flat for 20 years and now is taking off like a hockey stick because of, in part, due to the data center investment cycle we're in. That is not the case in many emerging markets in Asia, where demand has been growing very steadily for many years, and this is an added potential growth on top of that. From a resource planning perspective and a grid investment planning perspective, that slow growth in the United States positions us to be very reactive to this emerging and sudden increase in forecast demand, whereas in other markets where demand has been growing, the added demand on top of existing demand forecasts creates a risk of overshooting that exacerbates one that was already there. The grid in the United States is very interconnected, but it is reaching capacity. The grid in many of these markets that we're talking about today is less connected, but also faces risks of stability issues and other challenges related to that lower connectivity. And finally, in the United States, where I'll base most of my remarks, there are deep and abundant pools of capital available, including from the hyperscaler data center developers themselves, to participate in grid investment. And in Asia, that looks different, with different pools of capital and a mix of public and private investment that's being prioritized here. Despite those differences, I do think a lot of the opportunities that we're starting to see come up in the United States are relevant for other markets as well. And so before I get into the content of the presentation, I wanted to give you 3 big categories to think about as I walk through the content around demand side innovations, grid upgrades, and supply side investments that can be the building blocks of addressing this challenge. So just briefly, and I'll return to this at the end of the presentation, from a demand side perspective, the opportunities that we see are to harness the latent flexibility and efficiency potential both within data center campuses and across the system to lower overall demand and slow the pace of needed investment even while meeting load growth. From a grid upgrades perspective, we're starting to see companies actually deploy emerging technologies on a first of a kind or second of a kind basis to improve the grid and its capacity to take on more data center demand quickly and increase the speed to power and increase certainty for data center developers and reduce some of that uncertainty that comes from the lag between wanting to build a data center next year versus waiting for a transmission line that'll take 10 years to build. And on the supply side, we're starting to see innovative solutions, both on-site power as well as procurement of off-site power solutions for data center campuses and other strategies to take advantage of existing infrastructure to bring more supply on quicker. And again, I think these are relevant. We're starting to see their promise in the US despite some false starts, and I believe they're relevant around the world in countries facing these challenges. So with that opening thought about the connections between the markets, I did just want to level set on some basic facts about why the United States might be relevant here as we think about the context. The first observation is that the United States is by far the largest market for data centers currently, and it is growing the fastest from the largest base. So for better or for worse, we in the United States will be on the front lines of both the issues and the opportunities of this market expansion for the time to come. As I mentioned before, the United States has had 2 decades now of completely flat demand growth across most of the country and across the country as a whole. And then every year that the utilities in the United States have been updating their forecasts, they have been updating them higher and higher and higher every year. So the chart shows the actual demand for about half the utilities who file resource plans every year, which is completely flat since 2005. And then each of these lines show 1 year's aggregate forecast. So in December of 2021, utilities were forecasting a 10% growth by the end of 2035. And just last year, that turned into a 25% growth. So every year they go back and they update and they find more demand waiting to come online to their system. About 40% of that is being driven by data centers in the near term. So it's not 100%, but it is a very large portion. And that's driving a significant amount of capital expense. The $360 billion is the latest number from McKinsey on what it's going to take to actually meet this demand for data centers specifically in the United States. But there's a lot of uncertainty behind these load forecasts. Supply chain constraints are limiting the availability of transformers, of gas turbines. Political backlash and other local opposition is putting the brakes on many of the data center projects that companies would like to build. Power availability, which is the focus of my conversation today, is slowing timelines as well as permitting for both the campuses themselves as well as the infrastructure to meet the energy demands. So that's 2 slides of context on how this is showing up in the US. I want to focus in on some of the challenges that we're seeing. At a high level, I want to focus on 3 big challenges. The first is uncertainty in the demand and the history of flat load growth, which I'll talk about again in a minute. One of the outcomes of the history of flat load growth and the wide uncertainty in demand is that we have been very slow to upgrade core infrastructure in the United States for the grid over the past 20 years. And the combination now of increasing demand and an aging grid that we have been slow to upgrade is leading to rising costs in a number of different ways, which I'll talk about here. So for data center companies themselves, rising costs are manifesting as very expensive, delayed, or isolated interconnection for their campuses. For utilities, rising costs are manifesting as higher prices for transformers, for gas turbines, for other key electrical supply equipment that is required to upgrade the grid to meet this new load. And all of this is getting pushed through into ratepayers and other customers who are the indirect, recipients is the wrong word, of some of these costs that are being driven by the sudden influx of demand. I think in the Asian context, the addition of significant and concentrated load growth in some markets, and we'll talk about which markets those are. I think some of my panelists will cover that later in the session today, means that some of these challenges could be felt even more acutely on top of that existing load growth pressure. But as I'll talk about, I hope that there's opportunities to use some of that demand growth, as the director said, to anchor clean energy development, to serve as grid positive loads through some of the solutions that I'll touch on, and I know my other presenters today are going to speak at more length about. I wanted to give just a little bit of data on the uncertainty. This is the history of how well US utilities have done on demand growth forecasting. So this represents the period from 2006 to 2023, and each one of these light blue lines is a 10-year forecast for peak demand growth from a single US utility. So if you squint your eyes, the top line message is that utilities are terrible at demand forecasting. The second, the more nuanced message is that on average, they are structurally biased upwards. So if you take the weighted average of all those blue lines, it is this thick blue line, which suggests that between 2006 and 2023, utilities over forecast future demand growth by 17 percentage points on average. That's a big deal. That's tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure that got built that weren't used as well as they could have been for years because demand was much slower to show up than forecast. And so that is on everybody's mind in the markets where I work and my team works as we think about how to quickly respond to the increase in data center demand that we see coming. I want to talk a little bit about the cost challenge we're seeing in the United States. The first thing to note is that because of some of the timeline delays that we have seen in the United States for interconnecting new data centers to the grid, an increasing share of data centers are going off-grid, are building their own captive power supply, are locating far away from grid interconnection, and with no real plan to interconnect to the grid anytime soon. They're paying a premium for that. So the 140 to 160 US dollars per megawatt hour is the range of estimates that I've seen for one of the largest off-grid data center campuses in the United States that went online or is under construction and will go online soon. And that's at least twice, if not 3 times higher than average industrial rates in the United States. So data centers are paying a premium already for speed to power. They're also driving up costs for others. The chart on the left here shows the clearing price for electricity generating capacity in PJM, which is the largest electricity wholesale market in the United States. It was on a downward trajectory starting in 2017. And all of a sudden, as every data center in the country wanted to start locating in PJM, they put their load into the forward load curves that PJM uses to clear the market for capacity, and everybody started paying for it. Even before these facilities were built, customers across the region saw their bills increase by literally a factor of 2 or 3 overnight before the facilities were even built, because the market had cleared high based on anticipated future demand. Other drivers of this include increased spending on, as I mentioned, CapEx for generation projects, grid modernization, and transmission expansion. And the chart in the middle here shows the forecasts and the history for how US electricity prices have been just on a steady rise over time. And some of those same pressures show up in Asian markets as well. I'll highlight here fuel price volatility, which is a big issue in the US given our extreme weather exposure and the impacts it has on natural gas and coal supply chains in the United States. In Asia, the dynamic is different. I probably don't need to go into the details of that, but we have fuel price volatility all over the world, including here, as well as in the United States. I mentioned the behind-the-meter trend in data center investment in the United States. I want to spend a minute on this slide because I think it kind of captures both the good and the bad of where we've seen recent investment activity in data centers and power supply strategies for data centers in the United States. So in the system integrated box up here in the upper left, some of the best examples that I've seen that my team has worked with companies on for data center energy supply are grid connected. They have flexible load. So a number of companies, and I'll try not to name names here to protect the innocent, but have put together significant levels of demand response, of flexibility into their own data center operations so that they can be somewhat grid responsive. And I think we'll talk about that later. They've signed offtake agreements with utilities that not only cover their costs, but actually provide some level of rebate back to neighboring customers. So the customers surrounding the data center actually save money because of the contract structure that the data center has signed, in part, and this is the second point, the next point, because of improved grid utilization. Actually adding more load to a given area can reduce the average price paid by everybody because you're amortizing fixed costs over more energy sales, and customers can actually pay less. Some of the leading companies have put in storage and demand response strategies as part of their investment plans for data centers. So I will name names here. Google last week in the United States announced a 100 megawatt deal for distributed energy resources and virtual power plants in the PJM market that I was talking about earlier to help offset its increased capacity needs in PJM. So they're looking everywhere for megawatts and finding them available in different and innovative structures. The final thing is clean tech acceleration. Some of the most interesting grid-connected projects are actually contracting for off-site power from natural gas with CCS, from geothermal, from nuclear power plants. This is a way to use data center money to directly invest in some of the innovative technologies that we know we may need to fully achieve a clean energy transition. So that's what good can look like. What we're seeing is 30% of companies are now trying to put data centers off-grid, behind the meter, powered by behind the meter gas plants. I see this as a big missed opportunity in most cases. Captive power may seem like a fast path to achieving speed to power and supporting reliability, but it doesn't allow for shared investment in society-wide resources. It puts the companies at more risk of fuel cost volatility. It eliminates opportunities for coordinated investment at the grid level for where data centers might want to locate and how we could reach, serve more load in the same area at lower cost than every company building its own supply. So this is maybe one of the key challenges that we're seeing in the United States is a turn to captive power and the missed opportunities that represents to use data center development and digital technologies as a grid solution. I want to talk now about some of the specifics of those opportunities. And I'll try to highlight three categories here. And these correspond to some of the grid upgrades and demand side management and grid investment opportunities I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. Maybe the first observation is that it is certainly true that when you add a data center to an existing utility service territory, you're going to increase load. So let me walk you through kind of how this shows up on an annual basis. So what we've drawn here is a stylized load duration curve, so 8,760 hours per year of demand sorted from highest to lowest for the data center, or sorry, for the system, for the utility. And now we're adding a gigawatt of data centers on top of this. And this is representative of, say, a medium-sized utility in Texas. This is all based on Texas data, which is one of the largest markets in the United States for new data center development. So you shift the whole load up because that data center wants access to power every hour of the year. And the observation I want to make is that while the peak is exactly as much higher as the new data center wants power access, that new peak only shows up for, say, 300 hours per year. So we're only actually exceeding the capacity of the existing system for a very small percentage of hours per year. And for every other hour, so for 8,500 hours per year, the existing system, in most cases, can cover the new demand, the new rising demand. So the priorities that we're seeing from some of the companies we work with are to find solutions that at least cost meet this need as quickly as possible, while also supporting more broad evolution towards meeting the rising curve in the most affordable and sustainable way going forward. So what does that look like? So I want to return to this idea of there are demand side fixes, there are grid upgrades, and there are supply side investment strategies that can solve this challenge. These can happen both at the facility level, so what you can do at the data center company itself. So I gave the example of data centers using demand response, but you can also invest off-site in small-scale resources that can lower overall system demand and create headroom for new data centers, and we're seeing this in places like Minnesota, as well as other markets in the United States. Grid upgrades, I'll talk about advanced transmission technologies in a few minutes as a big category of opportunities for utilities and data centers to work together to speed up interconnection. And also on the supply side, I'll talk about some innovative strategies we've seen for new generation investments, but also better use of existing generation facilities. So to give a couple examples here, we're seeing an immense wave of innovation and deployment in battery storage globally, but in the US, a lot of that has been focused on solving the data center challenge. One of the ways that we've seen this happen is deploying batteries within the distribution system. So very targeted opportunities to put batteries where they provide the most value, which provides not only system capacity, but also alleviates some of the transmission constraints. We're finding opportunities to put data centers at homes, which provides backup power and other value to the homeowner while also creating system capacity on the grid. And there's a lot of opportunity left to go for battery deployment and other small-scale flexibility resources that collectively can make a big difference in making the grid more efficient and creating room for more investment and power for data centers. I want to talk just for a minute about advanced transmission technologies. This is a collection of technologies that includes better conductors, so better wires that power can flow through, as well as advanced software and hardware controls that can shift power around and get more capacity and lower congestion out of the existing system. We're seeing not only utilities invest in these strategies, but also in partnership with some data center companies making investments in some of the specific technologies that can increase capacity for the grid that they want to connect to. And then I wanted to highlight one final opportunity here, which the RMI team calls power couples, but generally speaking is the idea that we can interconnect new renewables behind the point of connection for an existing power plant. So I'll walk through a visual example here. There's hundreds of gas-fired power plants in the United States that have very low utilization. They only run tens of hours, maybe hundreds of hours per year. The idea here is that we put renewables and a new data center very close to that natural gas-fired power plant. We power the data center mostly, but not entirely, with new renewables. We allow the gas-fired power plant to serve the data center load when the renewables aren't available. And the key thing here is that we actually export excess power back to the grid through the existing point of interconnection without having to upgrade the grid necessarily to accommodate that excess power, because it's going through an existing point of connection for the gas plant. We found that this can not only reduce overall cost, but also reduce overall CO2 and provide energy to the grid flowing to customers that is low cost and carbon free. So one of many examples on the supply side that we can use to accelerate and make more cost-effective data center investment. I'm running out of time here. I want to give plenty of time to my other panelists, so maybe I'll go through a couple of these remaining slides quickly. I wanted to highlight that a lot of the contract structures that utilities are starting to require in partnership with data center companies are quite innovative in the United States. After a number of, again, mistakes that we've made in the past 5 years, we're starting to see a lot of improvement in the way that we structure power supply agreements between off-takers for data centers and utilities. They include ratepayer protections, they include more certainty around costs for the developers, and they provide credibility to some of the load forecasts that we're seeing. There's a wide variety of opportunities for innovation here beyond just baseline tariffs, which kind of provide a basic contract, towards a flexible tariff, which provides value to behind the meter flexibility, or even a bring your own resource tariff, where this allows companies to invest directly in things like geothermal or other advanced generating technologies to meet their needs. We're starting to see this in Malaysia as the example we wanted to highlight in Asia, where tariff structures are being used to accelerate investment. I'm gonna skip the last couple slides here and just go to the final point I want to make, which is we have many options ranging from least regrets solutions to proactive opportunities that are just now starting to be explored in the United States. And again, I hope can be inspiration for the conversation today and for decision makers around this region around avoiding the mistakes and capitalizing on some of the opportunities that are beginning to emerge. As I've kind of given some details in a tour, they can range from reducing overall demand, increasing grid stability. These are near-term options that can be done quickly, all the way up to strategic planning for coordinated investment in load growth, in transmission, in generation, through things like economic zones and energy parks, and everything in between. But the last message I want to leave with is, because folks want to build data in 1 year, and it takes 10 years to build large-scale grid infrastructure, the best solutions emerging from my experience in the United States after, again, years of mistakes are fast, that can be put on the grid quickly, that are affordable, that drive down costs for everybody, including the data centers, and that are flexible and get around some of the uncertainty that we're seeing and how much load will show up and when. And with that, I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Mark, and DG Vinny, for the Energy 360 perspective that we're starting this session with. And for now, I'm hoping that everybody has the WOVA app on their devices because we have a live polling session. So please whip out your phones and devices. So the first live polling we have, the question, hopefully you can click on it on our session. I don't think we'll be able to have it up on screen at this time. But the first question is, what is the biggest challenge power systems face in light of the rapid data center growth? You have, I believe, 5 options there, and hopefully we'll be having the responses coming in. Sorry, the WOVA app, which is the app that, but DG, you can tell us what you think is your key one. And what we have is grid congestion, power shortages, grid cost, emissions, and investment readiness. I don't have any responses on the app yet, but hopefully we'll have them in a minute. It's asking me to make it, okay. I need to choose as well, okay. Ooh. I have responded. Oh, we have a few, we've got 30 answers on. And the one that has the most of 14 of the 33 that have responded is grid congestion. Second with power shortages and then investment readiness. Grid cost, and with the lowest, we've got emissions as the lowest. I don't know if I can share poll results. Not happening on the screen, but you'll see it on your devices. We can move on to the second live polling question, a final one. Do you see data centers and digitalization primarily as a challenge or opportunity for your country's energy transition? As we heard from Mark, you can see the opportunities and the challenges that the US faces at this time. And I'm sure that we've had time to do a little bit of reflection for your own situation. Oh, and it seems I need to answer this too. And of course, it's good to see most participants today see this as an opportunity more than a challenge, and which of course leads us into our next session. Our next session is From Policy to Power: Can the Grid Keep Up? Here we have presentations and a panel discussion on the planning and policy challenges. I'd like to call onto the stage Natalie Kauf, Policy Analyst, Southeast Asia for the International Energy Agency. She'll be speaking on energy and AI, demand-driven and global driver and global trends.
Thank you very much. And it was great to hear the first 2 presentations this morning where I saw we got a shout out in one of them and a citation in the other. So I feel that as the International Energy Agency, we've already done our job of getting more data out on the energy sector. So let's dive into that data a little bit more. So what I wanted to talk about today is a lot of the data center demand growth. And last year in April 2025, the IEA released its first comprehensive analysis on the energy implications of the artificial intelligence. But this is a field that's moving really quickly. And just recently we updated it, this analysis, and we look at building on this report and addressing some key questions. So this time we also looked at doing a little bit of myth busting, considering that there's been so much discussion and excitement around this topic. Perhaps one indicator of how fast things are moving is capital expenditure by the largest tech companies. And in 2025, this reached $400 billion US. In 2026, these 5 companies announced a 70% increase. And this year, investment by these companies, largely in data centers, is set to reach over $700 billion US. This is more than the entire oil and gas industry invests in production. Data on AI use is unfortunately sparse. We've been trying to support the development of increased data, but open source platforms can give an indication of how much use has increased. One of these, Open Router, saw a 6-fold increase in token consumption, which are the basic building blocks of AI, in the last 12 months. Our IEA data also shows what this means for the energy sector. We estimate that total data center electricity consumption grew by around 17% in the last year. And efficiency improvements have partially counteracted that use, although they can't totally counteract the fact that the consumption is increasing so quickly. So it's important to remember that electricity consumption is growing for a variety of reasons across the world, especially in this region, and data centers are only one part of this story. But we do estimate that data center electricity consumption contributed around 10% of total global demand growth in 2025. That's comparable to about the increase from electric vehicles. And here we see the speed of AI development is increasingly coming up against physical constraints, some of the constraints we heard about in the presentation just prior to this one, especially in manufacturing value chains and energy systems. Within the energy sector, key energy equipment such as gas turbines, transformers are sold out for the next few years, and ramping up manufacturing capacity will take some time. In many jurisdictions, data centers are trying to connect to networks that are already congested, and where connection queues can take years. Within the IT supply chain, the incredible pace of AI development is leading to manufacturing capacity shorts across the value chain. For example, in the last 6 months, a binding capacity constraint for advanced memory has emerged. Here we look at the entire value chain and integrate these restrictions into our projections. Our baseline projections for near-term data center electricity demand is now at the upper end of our range, and near-term constraints prevent a higher outlook, while committed spending and capacity is limiting the downside. In the longer term, the uncertainty is much wider. Even higher upsides cannot be excluded. So what's the source of all of this uncertainty in the energy sector? So part of it is also looking at, will AI monetization catch up to the huge capital spending? And how will the energy intensity of different AI tasks and models evolve? And we'll look at that in more depth. For this reason, I reported a deep dive into the energy consumption of AI tasks and how they're evolving. Leading tech companies have recently disclosed how much simple text queries consume in terms of energy. And actually, it was surprisingly low. These figures converge at around 0.3 watt hours. That's equivalent to using a television for about the same amount of time. It's so low that theoretically, to give you an image here, if all of today's data centers' electricity consumption were devoted to answering simple text queries, it would generate so much text that the entire adult population on the planet reading for the entire year without any breaks would be needed to read it all. So that leads us to believe that this is actually not what's driving the AI build-out today. Instead, it's other more energy-intensive modalities such as video generation, agentic AI, model training. These are many times more energy-intensive. For example, an agentic AI query with the model running independently of human input across a task is now commonplace. And these can use hundreds or even thousands of times more energy than text queries. So we're tracking how these more energy-intensive modes are impacting the energy footprint. And here, more systematic disclosure from tech companies would be helpful. With the growing capability and complexity of AI models, data centers are increasingly being designed around specialized hardware that's being used to train and run them. We call these AI-optimized data centers in order to contrast them with conventional data centers running cloud applications or web streaming. In our analysis, electricity demand from conventional data centers continues to grow as the economy becomes more and more digitalized. But AI-driven data centers that are really driving total data center electricity demand by 3 times, increasing by 30. With the rise of AI-driven data centers, a whole new supply chain is being created around electrical equipment they will be needing. And so here, let's highlight this a little bit. A first and slightly counterintuitive example is weight. So AI racks, and you can see one drawn to scale here, can weigh as much as a pickup truck. You probably didn't know you were going to be looking at AI racks today, but because they pack in so much electrical and cooling equipment. These racks are growing more and more power dense, and a cutting edge rack in a few years may be drawing as much power as 65 households. And they can have much more variable loads. What are the energy implications of these shifts? So a whole stock of electrical technologies in data centers are being upended, creating innovation for certain technologies, such as solid-state transformers and advanced power electronics. But it's also highlighting certain vulnerabilities, especially where supply chains are concentrated. In addition to analyzing power delivery architectures, we are also looking at how they're being built and how quickly. We tracked up to the top 23 AI data centers being developed by leading hyperscalers using satellite data. And contrary to popular perception, while they are being built away from tier 1 cities, they are being built near population centers. And almost all of them are within 60 kilometers of towns of more than of at least 100,000 people. Once complete, these facilities will consume many times more electricity than the towns they are close to. And they're being developed very quickly. I'm being told I have limited time, so I'll just quickly go through how they're being powered. Renewables remains popular, and we're seeing renewables being built out quite quickly, considering the sustainability commitments. And we also estimate that over 50% of power center electricity demand will be met by renewable PPAs in the next year. And we're also seeing data center load growth, looking at that on-site power generation, which we saw the example from the US. And globally, this is increasing an astonishing 70%. Of natural gas turbine orders in the last year. So only related to data centers, this has become a main part of the story. So what does this mean for consumers? And we saw some point about higher prices recently. One of the key issues that has been a lot of attention is how are data centers increasing electricity prices? And this is a complex issue, but we do see a growing correlation between data centers and prices. And what we see in terms of the correlation is that it depends on the energy system. So we had the example of a plane. For a lot of people who flew here today, this week, you know that if a plane is not full, the cost per passenger will be higher than if you're better using the capacity resources that you have. And this could, as we heard from the last presentation, actually decrease electricity prices in some sectors. So I'll leave you on that point and look at how actually energy, the data centers could be an important part of energy policies and technologies and developing an energy transition if done in a responsible way. And we'll look later at the innovation opportunities and how data centers could contribute effectively to the energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And just wanted to share that on the WOVA app, we already have 2 questions for the panel later. Please do bring your questions onto the WOVA app and Peter can ask them later. I'd like to bring to the stage Latika Muli, Project Lead Advisory Aurora Energy Research. She'll be speaking on the impact of data center load growth on power systems in Southeast Asia and beyond. Latika.
I can speak without slides. Yeah, no worries. No worries. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Okay, it's working. Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Latika. I'm from Aurora Energy Research, and what I'll be taking you through today is essentially case studies from our forecasts of the data center impact on Thailand and Malaysia. What I essentially want to do is show you some of the insights that we have obtained from simulations that we've run. When data centers come online, depending on the demand growth of data centers, how does it impact the grid? How does it impact energy supply? And other aspects of the power sector, such as reserve margins, emissions, and so on. And this ties in really well with a lot of the topics the previous presenters have talked about. So I'll mention those as well. And then the final thing I want to talk about in light of today's session is how can data centers be used to further the energy transition? And where does that opportunity really lie? Given the poll, we saw that a lot of us in the room believe that data centers are more of an opportunity than a challenge, hopefully. So I want to spend a bit of time discussing how that could actually happen. So just a quick introduction and context setting on what you're about to see today. So Aurora, we are a long-term power market and grid analytics firm. What this means is we have in-house tools that we use to forecast the energy and power markets, whether that's capacity, generation, wholesale and retail prices, and so on. So what we do is we look at how demand would change over time, and we essentially try to forecast the least cost way for a country to meet their power demand. This is important because a lot of the results that I'll be showing you today represents essentially our forecasts on the least cost way that Thailand and Malaysia, two of maybe if I could say the hottest data center markets in Southeast Asia right now, I'm essentially showing you the least cost way they can deal with data center demand. And the modeling tools that we use are all in-house. They're based on, of course, a lot of different assumptions and inputs, such as the maximum potential solar capacity possible in the countries, weather traces, assumptions on demand, as well as commodity prices. And in a lot of the previous sessions, we were talking about how commodity prices are impacting Southeast Asia today. So I'll also just mention a couple of things we're seeing in Thailand and Malaysia right now. So just as context setting, we've been modeling Thailand and Malaysia in terms of how the demand would change. National demand, of which of course we expect data center demand will become a key component. What I'm showing you on this slide are the base case demand as well as the high case data center demand, because this essentially will show you how it will affect the impacts on the power sector. What we've modeled and what I'll be sharing today is for Thailand, we've done base case, which is 6.8 gigawatts of ITE capacity by 2050, and the high case is 19.8 gigawatts by 2050. Just for context, I believe Thailand today is at about 1 gigawatts of data center capacity. So as you can see, if this plays out, this is essentially a 5 to almost 20x growth just in the next 15 to 20 years. In Malaysia, what we're looking at is a base case of around 5.4 gigawatts by 2050 and a high case of about 20.9 gigawatts by 2050. So as you can see, quite an exponential trajectory as well over here in relation to the current demand of which is about 800 to 900 megawatts. So a couple of things that we've learned and that we are expecting how the power markets might deal with this. Number one, if I want to talk about capacity, the least cost way that we are expecting Thailand and Malaysia would be able to deal with this is really through increasing significant amounts of solar capacity. Solar being one of the cheapest technologies available, there is abundant resources, there is abundant land. So we do expect that there will be a significant amount of solar installations over the next couple of years. But with that said, gas will continue to be one of the most important firming technologies and will still continue being important up until 2040, 2050s. This is particularly because in the near term, we would expect that immediate increase in data center demand has to be met by gas. And because of the intermittency of solar, unless significant amounts of BESS comes in, the economies will continue relying on gas to meet 24/7 demand. One additional point I want to make about differences between Thailand and Peninsular Malaysia is in terms of reserve margins. What we're seeing today is that Thailand actually already has a significant amount of supply and a healthy reserve margin, which means if you look at the additional installed capacity between the two countries, you'll see that there's not that much more thermal that is required to be built. In Malaysia, what we've observed actually is that reserve margins are already eroding because of data centers and increasing demand. And that means that over the next 15, 20 years, we are expecting that Malaysia would have to almost double the capacity, especially as they go through the coal to gas transition. There'll be almost an additional 7 gigawatts of gas that would have to come online to phase out coal and to meet additional demand. If I talk about generation though, what I'm showing you on this slide is essentially how does the generation trend over the years and how is it affected by data center demand. In Thailand, what we're seeing is that thermal and particularly gas will continue to be the majority that's supplying the economy, including a lot of the data centers. And in one of the next few slides, I'll show you where the data center clusters are in comparison to where the thermal assets are versus where the solar assets are. In Malaysia, we see that there is a significant amount of coal today. As that's phased out, we do see a lot of gas generation coming in as well. But in both economies, what we're forecasting is on a least system cost level, thermal will continue to make up the majority of generation. Solar will increase, wind will increase in Thailand, for example. But with that said, thermal will continue to make up at least more than 50%. In Malaysia's case, it will continue to make up 70%. I want to talk about emissions because in one of the polls, we actually saw that only, I think, one person in the room believed that emissions would be not as much of a concern. And what I'm showing you here is we are expecting that as data center capacity increases, near-term emissions in the economies will actually increase. Because like I mentioned, this will actually majority be fulfilled by gas. We do expect long-term declines in emissions. In Thailand, we expect it to be a little less, only about 1% decrease up until 2040, because it's already being supplied by gas. It will continue to be gas-led. In Malaysia, we're forecasting a steeper decrease in overall power sector emissions because of the coal to gas phase out. But with that said, carbon emission intensity will see a steep decline because increasing solar generation will cover more intervals in the day when data center demand, for example, can be met with renewables. In terms of the grid capacity, what we've essentially done is we have actually looked at where are the data center clusters, where are the renewables, the thermals located, where does the grid lie in terms of where are the different voltage lines. In Thailand, what we're seeing is majority of the data center growth is right now in the metropolitan areas as well as in the Eastern Economic Zone or the EEC. There have been incentives rolled out to distribute the DC load to other parts of the country, but most of the announcements that we're tracking is around the EEC area. And theoretically, the grid is strong enough in the EEC. We see a 500 kV backbone. We see that it's in close proximity to majority of the thermal plants. But with that said, there's a lot of reinforcements that will be needed. We are already hearing about lags in data center connection points and the ability to get permits, as well as potential power shortages. And Malaysia is a good case for this because this is where a lot of the recent announcements have been, where we're seeing that a lot of the data center build out is in Johor, Cyberjaya, and Kuala Lumpur. What's essentially happening is the grid there is facing congestion issues. There are multi-year delays in data centers being able to connect, being able to power themselves. And especially for data centers that want access to renewable energy, most of the solar plants are being developed up north. And that's essentially where the wheeling power becomes an issue because they have to wheel power from the north to the south. And that's where curtailment and congestion becomes much more of an issue. So this is something we're already seeing in Malaysia, and it is kind of a writing on the wall for Thailand if proactive planning is not implemented. One key way that data centers can further the energy transition is, of course, through power procurement agreements. And in both of these countries, the PPA scenario looks quite different. What we are seeing is that in Thailand, there is a DPPA mechanism that's in draft stage. We've seen quite a lot of interest from data centers, but with that said, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty right now. In Malaysia, there has been the previous CGPP program. The CREST program is currently ongoing. but most of the announced partnerships are still in announced stages. I believe the first couple of announcements on an actual implemented partnership has been coming out as of last week, but there's still quite a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot of risk that off-takers are facing. And one key point that we want to flag is that unless DPPAs are operationalized and they become a clear mechanism for off-takers, it will be challenging to reach the levels of solar build-out required to minimize reliance on gas for data center build-out. So DPPAs are really the key ways that regulators should be looking at to increase solar build-outs in the country. And then I just want to do one deep dive on Malaysia, and this was a point that was talked about in the previous sessions as well, which was what does PPA procurement look like and why is it attractive for data centers? In Malaysia, for context, data centers are classified as ultra high voltage class, and they face some of the biggest industrial tariffs. When we do a comparison of what their savings could look like if they go via the CREST route and get a direct PPA, we actually see that they're perhaps the only class that has a significant business case and a very strong incentive to sign a CREST program. So this is where we're looking at DCs as a big driver of power procurement agreements in Malaysia, and they are really a lot of the ones at the forefront of signing a lot of the new deals and that are being announced. I know I'm out of time, so maybe just a quick summary. Number one, DCs are really becoming a system-defining load, especially if a lot of the high cases that the governments are predicting will play out. We do see that they will become up to 10-20% of the national demand. There is significant capacity additions required, which means that if, for example, Malaysia has to install 7 gigawatts of additional gas by the early 2030s, that planning has to start now. Those auctions, those tenders have to come out in the next couple of years for us to be able to install this capacity by the early 2030s. Solar will dominate in terms of capacity additions, but gas will remain critical, particularly as a firming technology. And number 4, emissions reductions will be taking time to be realized. In the near term, we might actually see emissions go up, and the reductions actually might only come in the long term. And one final slide from my side is in terms of system planner considerations. Integrating DC load into national power system planning. The new PDP for Thailand, the new transmission development plans, all of these need to consider where are the DCs going to be built, how will they affect the local grids. Aligning investments with DC capacity growth and making sure that the upgrades are really localized in the areas where data centers are being built. Ensuring sufficient dispatchable and firm capacity. Establishing a transparent cost and emissions trajectory so that we avoid just falling back on gas consistently as demand goes up. And then finally, operationalizing and de-risking PPAs so that data centers can become kind of that instrument to increase renewable energy generation and installations. Yeah, that's it from my side. Please feel free to ask any questions during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Latika. And I would like to call Yongping Zhai, Senior Advisor for Tencent, to the stage to speak on solutions for sustainable data center development.
Thank you, DG Winnie, Peter, moderator, for invitation joining this session. I used to be I spent 21 years in this building. I left ADB 5 years ago and find a new job, my first job back in China. In my whole career, first job in China, that is in internet company, #1 tech company in China, Tencent, which is twice of size of Alibaba, though Alibaba is better known. So I wanted to talk about, from Tencent perspective, how we deal with data centers and still we keep our objective of carbon neutrality. Yeah. 5 years ago, I joined Tencent. The first job was to make roadmap action plan for Tencent to achieve carbon neutrality. In China, the national goal of achieving climate neutral is by 2060. And the company Tencent, we decided, actually part of my work was to prepare a plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, right? And we are on track. If we can see, we are actually on track achieving toward 2030. What you have seen here is the carbon emissions from data centers. But what is not shown here is the sharp increase of electricity consumption last year due to AI application, pre-training, all these things we do. There is 30% of electricity increase consumption by the data centers in Tencent, but the carbon emissions declined by 1%. And the secret being we use a lot of green power. So solution is procurement of electricity by solar, wind, and the green sources. So of course, before we talk about green sources, the first thing is to make sure our data centers are efficient. So the national average of the PUE, this is power usage efficiency indicator, is 1.5 in China, and Tencent average is 1.246. So we are super efficient. If we are called to join to participate in a carbon trading market, we actually can get money back because we are below the benchmark. In fact, in Guangdong and provincial carbon trading market, we are earning money because we are more efficient than others, than the industry average. So achieving this because we use T-block technology to build data centers. In Tencent, we have a modular approach to build data centers. I heard the previous speakers already, data center can be built quickly. And here in Tencent, we are even more quicker because these are modular. We can ship and do it in 3-4 months. We can build data centers. And cooling, and we use AI actually to manage data centers energy management system. I have a time constraint. So and second strategy is to actually buy green electricity. In Tencent, we have 2 types of data centers. Data centers we own ourselves, and data centers are part of data center we rent, kind of leased data centers. Our own the data centers, the green power is almost 83%. On average, is a sharp increase from previous year. And leased data centers green power share is 21%. We do not have a direct control, but can push as part of a supply chain. We can push them through to comply with the more green power procurement. And one innovation we do is to try to see, in power sector, we know, I know quite well, can do power dispatch, depending on the demand fluctuation, you can dispatch different sources of power supply. In data centers, we can dispatch some of the compute tasks, depending on the price, supply curve of the price, cost of supply, and also as I said, whether the supply is from renewable energy. So depending on that supply curve given to us, we can dispatch some of the compute tasks, which can be dispatchable, which can be like some of the pre-training, some of the storage, some of the conversion of video things that are not so urgent, we can actually dispatch as needed. So there is a pilot project Tencent is doing to pilot the power compute coordination and to see whether we can make our data centers flexible to meet their supply. 3 minutes. Yeah, this is the pilot site. We have the pre-built. This is a modular data centers and put them in a solar wind industrial park. So then we can test how much that compute task can be dispatched. Yeah, this is, we have a system to see whether it's working. We can, each time we have visitor, we can show them actually some tasks are being sent to other places, and we can get the result and monitor. Last thing I mentioned, having listened to other speakers, I said in China, there's no shortage of power. There's a super surplus power supply in China. There's no constraint in power supply. There's no constraint in transmission network. So I had trouble to what kind of constraint in the pole. But in China, there's the two constraints for us as data centers, as internet company. One is cost of supply, because in China the industry tariffs are twice of the consumer residential because cross subsidies. So cost to us is high. Secondly, we still have the objective of achieving carbon neutrality. So a source of green power is scarce. This is, we have enough power, but we do not have enough green power. So that's the situation in China. To resolve this issue, not on slide, but I want to share this, is to see whether direct supply from renewable energy plus storage would be a solution to bring us cheaper power and green. That's something we plan for next step. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zhai. And now I'd like to bring our panelists onto the stage, starting off, of course, with our moderator, Peter Baum, Senior Energy Specialist from ADB. And also, this mic is starting to give up. Please have a seat. And also to bring on Natalie, Latika, and Mr. Zhai to the stage. Also would like to introduce two additional panelists, Ms. Bernice Gretchen P. Garcia-Rama. Ms. Garcia-Rama is the Chief Executive Officer of Digital Edge Philippines, where she leads the company's strategy, growth, and operations in one of Southeast Asia's fastest growing digital infrastructure markets. And also Amani Razif. Amani is a power systems consultant specializing in grid connection and power system studies within the evolving energy sector. And with that, I would like to hand over to Peter. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Melody, and good morning from my side as well. Really delighted to have you all on this panel this morning and dive into the discussion in a minute. I know we're a bit time constrained by the upcoming coffee break, but we'll make the most of it. And I'll say that up front, please get your questions ready. We really want this to be interactive. I'll start out with a few questions I have, but then we turn to the audience for questions on the floor. I think we heard a lot about the system overall, system impact, and the experiences around the world. But I want to start out, Amani, you with Siemens Energy, and I want to start out with the, let's say, the engineering perspective. Can you elaborate on the technical challenge of integrating large new loads like data centers, and share your experience, Siemens Energy experience, working in power systems in Southeast Asia and around the world?
Hello. Thanks, Peter. So I think this is a right question to start with, because the technical challenge of integrating data center into the grid is quite different from any other large loads connection that the power systems industry has managed before. And I don't think that is fully appreciated outside of the engineering community. Most large industrial loads like factories, smelters, commercial buildings follow predictable patterns. They ramp up and down. They follow human activity. Therefore, the grid planners can see this as foreseeable loads profile. All right. Regarding the technical challenges, there are three technical challenges that I can see from data center integration. The first one is the load